don't sell drugs, like don't get talked into it. Don't do none of that. It is not worth it. I mean, I almost gave away 10 years of my life for a $40 bag of drugs. It's the cost versus the benefit. It just does not weigh out.
This is Eagle Freedom Presents.
Andrew Drasen didn't develop his life-changing framework in a boardroom or a clinic. Andrew built it in a jail day room. After a decade consumed by heroin addiction, Andrew finished the final chapter of his memoir, A Vision of Hope, literally minutes before walking out of prison. But that was just the beginning of his journey of radical resilience, as he would be challenged again with the death of his fiancée, Caroline. Would you please welcome to the show, Andrew Drasen. Andrew, welcome to the show.
Hey, how are you doing? Glad to be here.
Andrew, let's jump right into your journey. How did you come up with the idea to write a book while you were in prison?
Well, I've been encouraged to write a book in the past. I went through 8 treatment programs before finding any kind of meaningful recovery and in and out of jail. Went to prison twice, and some counselors and social workers in the past. Through each treatment that I'd have to do an assessment where it's basically like an overview of your life, like what drugs you've tried, what was your childhood like. Just it's a kind of an in-depth look at your life, so they can kind of see where you're at. And I had a few counselors and social workers tell me that I should write a book, and both my mom and I had talked about co-writing a book in the past with where one side it would be like her cover and then her version of events, flip it over, and it would be the same events, but from my perspective. And that didn't happen. But during my overdose, and I knew I had 6 to 8 months to do that last stretch, and so I just decided to do it. And it was writing 4 to 8 hours every single day, and just putting in the work. But yeah, that's what made me decide.
Well, I really want to jump into more about the book, but let's kind of go back in time and kind of set things up for the audience. How did this all begin with your life getting addicted? Tell us about that journey.
Well, I mean, I had a fairly normal childhood, middle class, Midwestern childhood. I was overweight as a kid, dealt with some bullying, had some self-esteem issues as a result. And, I tried to compensate for that in every other way, by getting perfect grades and being very friendly and just likable and not giving other people a reason not to like me because I didn't like me. And I thought me being overweight, it was such a detriment that I had to make up for it in other ways. And so somewhere between sixth and seventh grade, I grew 6 inches, and I was no longer that little fat kid, but I felt that way on the inside still. I still didn't have the self-esteem or the confidence or any of those things. And so then I discovered marijuana, and it made me feel better momentarily. And I went to a middle school that was 500 students, middle and high school, and there was like an acceptance process. Like you had to go through an interview and had to shadow another kid, and they had to, kind of say you were a good fit. And so it was an alternative school. It wasn't part of like the public school curriculum, I guess. And for high school, I ended up switching schools. I took more of an interest in girls, and being a smaller school and kind of an alternative, more I guess intelligence themed school. I felt like my pickings were kind of slim there. So I switched schools for high school, and I went from 500 students to 3,000 students, and all of those insecurities just came rushing back. And so junior or freshman year is when my marijuana use really exploded, and it turned into all day, every day. And by sophomore year, I had discovered pills and cocaine. And junior year, I discovered OxyContin, and that was immediate. I mean, it was the first time I sniffed an OxyContin, I was hooked immediately. I mean, the best analogy that I have is it was as if I was holding my breath for my entire life, and I was finally able to breathe. So that's what really kind of set off my battle with opiates. I mean, it went from a 20 milligram a day habit with OxyContin to 400 milligrams a day, and pretty quickly too. So then I I was arrested at school my junior year. That's what kind of started my battle with the legal process. And, and I discovered heroin, which was much more effective and cheaper than OxyContin. And so that replaced that. And then I discovered the needle, and, then chaos ensued from there. I mean, just overdoses and in and out of jail and prison. And it consumed my life for 13 plus years.
So your drug use when you started getting into drugs was basically your coping mechanism to deal with what you had already gone through. As you mentioned, you grown, you had that period where you grew, but you still had in your mind, you still had that inner feeling that I'm not good enough. This is my image that I see myself. It's not the image that somebody else is telling you. It's the image that you are telling yourself. And I think that happens a lot in people's lives is we're worried about the image we're telling ourselves, right? We're so, oh, I'm not good enough. I come from a background that's abusive background or something like that, and we carry those images with us in our mind. And so your drug use was the way for you to escape all of that, right?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it turned into my top coping skill. I mean, and it didn't matter what I was coping with. I could feel happy, sad, depressed, lonely, connected. It really didn't matter. I mean, I didn't know how to live with myself. And it helped me momentarily. I mean, it's in a twisted way, it's obviously the help turned into to harm, but that was the initial allure. Is it helped me, cope with who I was, and I didn't know how to be. So, yeah, that was the initial thing.
So what was the turning point? What was it that finally landed you into your prison stint where, okay, this is where you're gonna be now for a while, so you're taking the outside world's gone for now. You just have yourself. Where did all that transition happen?
Well, I mean, like I said, I was sentenced to prison twice. The first time I was fighting a paraphernalia charge. I was caught with some drug paraphernalia from an overdose, and so I was going through withdrawals, and I was talking to a woman at the time, and she ended up coming over to my house. I left work early because I was going through withdrawals, and I couldn't manage being at work, and so she came over and asked if I could get her some. And so we called my dealer, and like long story short, she ended up overdosing at my house, and I called 911, and the cops came, and she told them that she got the drugs from me. So I ended up going to jail, and that was my first prison sentence. I was sentenced to 2 years. I did 16 and a half months. I saved like 7.5 months, something like that, from the earned release program, which is a drug program that essentially converts some of your incarceration time to time on extended supervision, parole, whatever term you want to use. Um, so yeah, that was the first sentence. The second one came 5 months after that. I was released, and I ended up getting set up, and I mean it was a case of entrapment, and I talk about all of it in the book, but I mean that's 10 plus years ago. But I mean that was the second time. Is I felt I knew something was off about what was going on, but I wanted to get high, and I ignored all of the more warning signs and the red flags, and I just kind of went through with it. And next thing I know, I'm back in jail, and looking at a decade behind bars this time. So luckily that time, 3 days before I was to go to trial at my final pretrial, they ended up coming at me with the plea that I said that I'd take from the very beginning. So I ended up getting about 2 years instead of 10 years. But yeah, that was a hard time. I mean, looking at a decade in prison, it shed some light on some things. I'll say that.
And so you hear it all the time. You hear stories about prison and drugs being prevalent in prison. So is that something you encountered while you're in prison? Was that existing while you were there?
Yes and no. I mean, I feel like you had to kind of search out for it. My first time in prison, like I did do some drugs in prison. I'd buy Percocets off of someone who like tore their ACL, or they had something with their knee, and they were getting prescribed a Percocets, and I'd buy some Percocets off him sometime. The second time in prison, I didn't do any drugs, but the day that I got to Fox Lake Correctional Institution, I ended up hearing from inmate.com, which is just like, it's just a term for what inmates are saying, so you don't know if it's true or not, it's just it's word on the street essentially. But I'd heard that someone in another unit had gotten caught like that day with like 10 grams of heroin and like a quarter pound of marijuana and like just an obscene amount of drugs, especially for being in prison. I don't even know where you'd hide all that. So again, I can't even say if that was true or not, but I mean, they're there, but I feel like you got to kind of look for them.
Yeah, what was the turning point for you? What was it that said while you were in prison that you this wasn't the life that you wanted to live? What was it that made you switch and go, "Okay, I need to do something different with my life"?
Well, I mean, I'd say like each time I slipped, I mean, I'd learned kind of a different lesson, it was during that second incarceration that kind of taught me like don't even don't sell drugs, like don't get talked into it, don't do none of that. It is not worth it. I mean, I almost gave away 10 years of my life for a $40 bag of drugs, I mean, it's the cost versus the benefit, it just does not weigh out. Then there were other, I'd say, seeds that were planted along the way. After I was released from that second incarceration, I ended up getting into a relationship that essentially showed me that I could have a different way of life for myself, and that kind of instilled in me a desire to change. So, and I ended up wrecking that relationship. I overdosed, landed back in jail, and I did a inpatient treatment program. So I was locked up for 2 months, and she left when I got out. But that's what really, at that point, I wanted to be clean for me because I already kind of got that taste of a different life and I could kind of see it for myself at that point. And that's the thing. It's like if we don't believe that we can have different or that our situation can improve, we're not going to put the effort in to improve that situation. It all starts with the belief and a hope that we can make things better. So I'd say that was kind of the next seed that was planted. And then the next one was writing the book. And, I mean, that was a very healing process. And it showed me that I could see something through, that I could, if I set my mind to something, I could see it through from beginning to end.
You touched on something I think that's really important, and that is the belief and hope that you can change. If you want to change, you got to have that belief and hope. So really, it goes back to the mindset aspect of all of this. Is that's the important part, right? This is it. If you're not right up here, it's not going to work. So you were getting right. These seeds were planted to change your mindset that I don't want to live this life anymore. I have the faith, I believe, the hope that I can change. Now I have to make it happen. So at what point? Let's talk about the book. What point did that book come to life? Where did you were incarcerated? How did that come to be?
So I got the alternative to incarceration. I knew I had 6 to 8 months to do. Those seeds had kind of been planted in the past, and previously I hadn't made the best use of my time while incarcerated. I'd spend it exercising and gambling for low stakes and watching Law and Order and things like that. And I just like I said, those seeds had been planted in the past, and I'd talked about writing a book in the past, so I knew I had the time to do so. I just decided to do it, and I just did it.
And you used the basis for your book was actually your journaling. Is that correct?
Yeah, so I journaled from essentially when I was incarcerated all the way up until release morning was the last journal entry. And so the chapters look back at my life, but then the journal entries are woven between the chapters, which chronicle basically my entire from the time I was arrested all the way through graduation of the treatment program. So I think that kind of gives a different perspective. It allows you to kind of see the growth in real time. Whereas those first journal entries, I just got the audiobook back. And so I'm listening through that right now. And some of those earlier journal entries that like I can hear the complaining in it, but then, as time goes on, the perspective changes and gratitude comes into play. And, I start to pull lessons out of the situations. And I think it's a very unique look. So.
So as you're walking through the doors, you're getting released. You're finally getting back out into the real world. What kind of feeling was that knowing that, you're out in the free world now, you have this, I guess, basically this blueprint now that you have down. What was it like walking through those doors this time versus last time?
Well, I mean, I'd say one thing, like, that may be a misconception for people who haven't been incarcerated, it's like, when you get out, there's this huge homecoming, but it's like it's almost like you never left. It's like, "Okay, now what do I have to do?" It's like now life starts again. It's essentially like you were in purgatory for however long you were there, and now you're released, and, okay, now it's time to get to work, so, um I mean, I definitely felt like I had more of a plan than previous times I had been released. But, as they say, man makes plans and God laughs at our plans. I ended up getting out and I got together with Caroline and I did carpentry for a couple of months and then I got into car sales. I did that for 4 years. Then I sold solar for 2 years and I actually lost half of the book and I ended up finding it at my dad's house. And this was after I had already exited solar and didn't really have anything occupying my time. So I kind of took that as a sign, like, you're supposed to finish this, finish it. So that's what I did. Caroline, as you kind of touched on at the beginning, she was also an addict and, we relapsed together. We got clean together, bought a condo together. And, um, she also had mental health issues and I got clean for the last time before she did. I'll have 3 years and, like, right around Thanksgiving. It was, like, a couple days before Thanksgiving of '23 when I got clean for the last time, and, um, and she had about 9 months clean when she took her life last July, so and that's when I was going through the editing process of the book, so that obviously slowed down the progress a bit, but ultimately, like, it's what inspired me to build the workbook and the curriculum. It made me kind of reflect on what fell short for me and what fell short for her and tried to build tools so other people don't feel so alone and can hopefully, take control of their lives before they make a decision that they can't take back.
Yes, and so it's not just a single book, it's actually a trilogy, as you put it, it's a trilogy, that this book can you touch on that? What do you mean by the trilogy? What's also incorporated in this?
Yeah, so there's A Vision of Hope, A Story of Redemption and Purpose, which is my memoir. There is A Vision of Hope Reflections, which just kind of distills the lessons learned along the way through bite-sized readings on 29 different topics, which are pretty wide-ranging. And then there's a workbook to allow for practical applications for healing and growth. And the workbook, it doesn't talk about drugs, it doesn't talk about criminality, it's pretty much a self-identifying workbook. So whoever is doing it essentially uses the memoir to serve as a mirror to look at their own life. And then they use reflections to kind of clarify their values and, their perspective on some things. And they essentially identify what they want to change, what they want to change it to. And then it helps to create that bridge to create and maintain that change.
And you're actually seeing some success with this book in that it's actually getting into some of the communities that you really want to impact, those that are incarcerated, recovery, and stuff like that. How does that process happen? How did that come about getting into those programs?
Well, it's still in the early stages of that. So the book's just released in December. The curriculum became fully available in January. And I mean, I do have a multi-state organization that's writing the curriculum into their RFP, which stands for Request for Proposal, basically request for grant funding. So if it's approved, then it will be rolled out throughout all of their facilities. But that is one thing that I learned is some doors it's going to take a little bit longer to open, like the Department of Corrections. In order for them to adopt a curriculum, it has to be evidence based, meaning you have to have like results and it has to be peer reviewed and like kind of metrics behind it. And that's a process I plan on undergoing, but it's a lengthy process. It takes time to, get those results and get it peer reviewed and go through, those steps. So, it's still something that I'm absolutely pursuing. It's just some doors take more effort to open than others.
And when you stop and take a look at where you were as a child to where you are now, and just the possibility of your work getting into these places, what kind of a feeling does that have inside you to know that your work is going to can have an impact on these other people?
I mean, it definitely gives me a sense of pride. I mean, I guess, if I can use my experience to help others avoid the same pitfalls that I fell in time and time again, I mean, that's what else is there? I mean, I feel like that's what life is for helping others. And I feel like when we get caught up in self motivation, that's when things tend to get kind of hairy, I guess. And, priorities tend to shift. And when we when we try and help others and do well for the benefit of others, I feel like the world just kind of opens up for you.
Yeah, and we're on the same wavelength when we talk about that because I really believe that we're here to serve other people in some capacity. Use our experience, our knowledge to benefit somebody else, not necessarily to gain anything like, personally gain, but except the fact to just help somebody overcome, like you just mentioned, with the course that you've been on, and hopefully prevent them from going down the same type of path that you've gone on as well, correct?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And I mean, the purpose for the book was a couple fold. It was, to help others, who are already heading down that path, for people who are already there, maybe already incarcerated, to serve, as the title suggests, a vision of hope that they too can change their lives if they believe it, for one, and then are willing to put in that action to change their lives. And then for, friends and family, for those who maybe haven't had those struggles, but know someone who has, to just grant a little bit more insight into what goes on in the life and the mind of someone who does suffer from those struggles.
I think that's an interesting point you just talked about because some families and some of your friends may not have that in their immediate reach, right there in their families or whatever. But what is it that they can do to help those who are or they see somebody going down that path? What are some of the steps they can do to try to prevent them from going that way?
Notice what friends they're hanging around, and watch for if like their behaviors change, if before, like, they were previously, very talkative, and then all of a sudden now they're spending a bunch of time in the room, that's kind of a red flag. And just kind of be present, and take notice of what's going on in your kid's life. I'd say that's the first step for someone with, like, a loved one who's already there, already dealing with addiction. I mean, sometimes you just have to kind of set a hard line, like, and if you get help, we will be here for you, but we cannot support you while you're living like this. Because addiction, it does affect much more than just the addict, even though the addict thinks it's my body, my choice, it only affects me. I mean, that's not the case. It can wreak havoc across an entire family structure. So sometimes it's just protecting the peace, and until that addict is willing to get help, because that's the thing, is like, you can never force someone to get better. It has to come from within and for themselves. Like, they can't want to get clean for, family, for friends, for a job. It has to be for their own life and well-being.
Yeah, you touched on something also that was really important, and that's associations, the people that you're hanging around with. They often say that, you become like your five closest friends. So if your five closest friends are doing something they shouldn't be doing, eventually you're going to gravitate to what those five people are doing. On the opposite side, if you're hanging around people who are, moving through life, going through obstacles, but coming out of them and living a positive type of life, you'll go graduate towards them. Do you believe that your association is really important?
Oh, definitely. I mean, we tend to learn from the people that we see. I mean, I feel like we learn from everybody. We can learn from, the smartest individual or the biggest idiot. We can learn what not to do. But we're kind of, the people that we surround ourselves with will rub off on us, and their thinking and their mindset will rub off on us. So what kind of mindsets are you surrounding yourself with? Are you surrounding yourself with people who continue to justify and make excuses and, run from their problems? Or are you associating with people who are building and, taking accountability and trying to grow? So, and that's one of the big I guess I'd say benefits of like 12-step meetings and things of that nature is the fact that it can help someone who's in early recovery link up with people who have been in recovery a little bit longer and maybe have a little bit better perspective and can give some guidance. Because that's kind of the other piece of it is when someone's dealing with addiction, we don't know how to live without. So it's kind of relearning. It's almost like a child, we have to learn how to be mad without, turning to drugs or alcohol, or, how to celebrate and how to reward ourselves without drugs and alcohol, or how to socialize. And, I mean, it's kind of learning how to live. And, if we don't know how to do that, we need someone to show us.
Yeah, and so many people have a mentor or somebody they look up to as they're going through some of these struggles. Did you have anything like that? Did you have a mentor? Did you have somebody that you leaned on to help you get you through this, or was it just your journaling that got you through all this?
So, I mean, like, during that incarceration, no, I mean, there wasn't a mentor. I mean, I had some sponsors throughout the years, but I never even like, I didn't even go through the steps all the way, which is something that I kind of wish that I would have done, because I feel like that's where the work is done. I feel like putting down drugs and alcohol is only the very, very first part, and then it's figuring out why you turn to that, and how you can avoid turning to that in the future, and developing new coping skills and things of that nature. And no, I mean, for me, is mainly falling on my face a bunch of times and learning from it.
Have you ever had the chance, since you've been out of prison, did you ever find yourself in a position where you were back in the element that you were in before and looking at it a whole different way?
Yeah, kind of. After Caroline and I got together, we go to AA meetings quite a bit, and there was this there was this like older woman that she knew from like a while back, and she used to go to the meetings also. And she that woman ended up kind of like falling off, and I remember Caroline kind of dragging me to she was living with this guy that she met at meetings, and she ended up dragging me to the guy's house. And we were there for like an hour or two, and like he was obviously drunk. I mean, he was just berating her like left and right, and like had his dog in a kennel, and like you could tell like the dog just pretty much lived in the kennel, and it was just a mess. It was a mess. It was like it looked like a flop house essentially. And we ended up taking that woman out of there and getting her out of that situation, and she ended up dying not too long after that, but at least she didn't have to die in that, filth and being berated by someone who didn't care about her. But yeah, I mean, that environment, I mean, it definitely kind of brought me back to some old environments, that's for sure.
Was it challenging for you to be there?
It was challenging for me not to try and maintain my composure, because just like, when like I'm a male obviously, and there's this other guy there who's drunk, and calling this older woman, you bitch, and just berating her to, like, every sentence. And so that was a little difficult in maintaining my composure. But again, had I ended up, getting physical, or, I could end up revoked, and, then I'm going back to prison for 5 years. So, that wouldn't help anyone at all. So, yeah, that was a little bit difficult.
If you could, no, no, if you could get a policymaker to understand maybe one thing about reentry or recovery, what would it be?
Well, I mean, I feel like our entire criminal justice system is kind of broken. I mean, in the book, I give a lot of specific like policy examples on things that I think that we can change to help make things better. And I'll just kind of touch on one of those. And it's for people who are doing long periods of incarceration, I feel like there needs to be a much better step down process. So for example, a friend of mine, he's in prison right now, and I talk to him fairly regularly. He's in the earned release program, so he's doing that same drug program that will get him out a little bit early. So he'll be out in like August. He's been down for about 8 years, and hadn't had any opportunity to do any programming before this, didn't have an opportunity to get to a work release prison so he could save some money to get out in a little bit better of a position. So he's going to end up getting released and have to go to either like a halfway house or a relative's house and have no resources. And that's something that I think we can do way better at. Start off at a little bit higher of a security and work your way down to the point where the last year and a half you're at a work release prison, so you can get out with resources and you can afford to put a roof over your head, and if not get a car, at least get a bus pass, or be able to get some kind of transportation and food, and provide for yourself. Then from there to go to like a halfway house, because the thing is like when you're in prison, like all of your decisions are decided for you. You don't have much choice of anything, and then you're released and you have choice of everything, and that can be very overwhelming, especially if you've done a long period of time. Because just, I mean, think about it, how much technology changes just every 10 years. I mean, um, what, 10 years ago we were at what, the iPhone 4 or something like that, and 20 years ago we were using the Razor phone, and now you have profiles for every job you want to apply to, and just the world changes very quickly and people get left behind. So then the other thing is just, I feel like putting more of an emphasis on peer support roles, people who have been there and have made it out and changed their circumstances to serve as mentors and to give guidance to those guys who are just getting out, or, girls who are just getting out. Because especially within the first 90 days, the overdose risk is 12.7 times that of the general population. You're released with less resources, um, usually no more coping skills, and in a more desperate situation than you went in. So we just got to prepare these guys for release better.
One of the things I was involved in, I was in law enforcement, and one of the things that I did get involved with was the drug court program. So I was involved in drug courts, both from a felony level and also from a family level. So I got to work with individuals who, on the felony side, as you know, if you've been involved in the drug court side, on the felony side, it's really your last step to prevent you from going into prison. And of course, the family side is you're trying to maintain the family aspect. You're trying to, so there was a little bit of leniency more on the family than there was the felony. And I thought what was really interesting was from my perspective, instead of just being somebody who, okay, this is what you got to do, just be hounding him, as I really tried to understand their life, understand where they were coming from, have a conversation with them, not just be in law enforcement, but also be a person as well, and sit down and have a conversation. Hey, how are things going? What are your struggles? What are you dealing with that you need help with? And sometimes, they stumble and they fall, because that's just the process. Is you stumble and you fall, but it's also, I believe, dealing with them on a level that doesn't say I'm above you, but I've got to do my job. But there's a way of doing it correctly and making it feel it's not so personal. You just really want to help somebody out. Have you ever experienced that type of an atmosphere within the law enforcement community?
Yeah. So, and this was like, it kind of blew my mind. I mean, it's the prologue in my book. It's the events that led me to the 8 month stay when I wrote the book. So I ended up overdosing in my car. I was trying to quit, and I ended up, the cops ended up coming, and I was put on a probation hold. So we were at the district, and I'd already been hit with Narcan, so they knew that I'd done opiates, and I had, before I was arrested, I had a syringe and some heroin on me, and I put them between my butt cheeks. And so we were at the station, and I was talking to the cops, and like they just had a very kind of positive demeanor to them, and like it was very different from pretty much every other interaction I had with law enforcement. And so I asked them if we could wait for my sister to drop off my glasses because I was arrested in contacts, and it sucks going to jail in contacts. You don't have a contact case, you don't have contact solutions. So my options would either be to get rid of them and be blind until I got my glasses, or sleep in them and strain my already strained eyes. So the cop said in his 16 years on the force, he'd never had someone ask him that, and that if my sister could get down there by 4 p.m., then we'd wait. So we had some time to kill, and I kind of shared my story with him. How I was addicted to oxy from the first time I sniffed one at 16 years old, to my battle with heroin and my prison sentences, and just kind of gave him my story. And I told him how I was considering starting a podcast, and he was like, you should. You could potentially help a lot of people. And so next thing I know, the cop kicks over a garbage can near my feet, and he was like, throw that in there. There's cameras all over. And so I didn't know what he was talking about. And I looked down, and the syringe had fallen out of my pant leg. So I bent down and I threw it in the garbage. And he asked me, he was like, do you have anything else that you need to get rid of? And at this point, I kind of had a decision to make, so and I went with my gut. I'd trusted him up until this point. Given me no reason not to. And I said, yes. And he asked me, he was like, flushable? And I said, yes. I was like, can I get rid of it? And another prison sentence isn't going to help me. And so I could see the wheels kind of turning for a minute, and he disappeared into the district, and he came back out, and he was like, all right, since you got to go to the bathroom so bad, come with me. And so he unshackled my legs and brought me into the cell, and I flushed the heroin. And, had he not let me do that, I surely would have been revoked, and I would have been going back to prison for another 5 years. And, the cycle would have probably continued. So, I mean, that act of kindness, I mean, it changed the trajectory of my life. So
Well, that was kind of like having a guardian angel or something above you, just watch and say, okay, here's a moment for you. Take advantage of this opportunity, right? And so you did the right thing. You followed your gut, and luckily, you didn't have to spend any more time, because carrying that inside a facility, then that's just going to add more time to your sentence. Let's talk a little bit more about you've got this. It's a school-based virtual community that you're developing. Tell us about this and how you, I guess, how do these serve as a lifeline for people in reentry, and why is it that this kind of ongoing ecosystem is so critical for long-term recovery?
So, to clarify, the school community kind of got nixed. I just have so much other things going on, but I did make a recent partnership with Orbit Recovery, which is it's SMS based. It's an app. It's a recovery app essentially, and it can be used by individuals or treatment programs, especially um, after care like ends. After their either their outpatient or their inpatient program ends, and there's no longer that kind of external safeguards. This is a great tool for it, but it's basically a bunch of just short text messages throughout the day, and like short exercises. And best way to think of it is it's almost like a virtual sponsor, and it's context aware. So one thing that the founder kind of told me is, like, he was having a conversation about alcohol once, and like it chimed in and like mentioned the conversation that he just had. So it can kind of help people stay out of hairy situations until they're able to kind of build those self-regulation tools. So I feel like that's going to be something that helps people, and that's all it is it's just putting together these tools that can potentially help others.
And you're in the process now of working on an app as well. Can you touch on that? What this app's going to do?
Yeah, so the app is a very different, completely different use case. But as I said, after I was released, I did the carpentry for 2 years, and then I sold cars for 4 years. So the app is initially for the automotive industry, and I found a need, and I decided to build a solution. It's essentially a negotiation intelligence and deep analytics app, because especially with auto specifically, there's a ton of turnover and there's not really a lot of training that goes on. And you get a lot of, it's called green pea reps, which are basically like rookie reps and, don't really know what they're doing. So it will help them be more prepared, and then also give insight for dealerships into their operations, which really I feel like that's where the value is. But yeah, so I've been working on that pretty heavily since February. The book's released in December and the curriculum became available in January. My summer event schedule is pretty much all set. So now I'm just trying to crank out this app, and my hope is that this is kind of the thing that allows me to fund my more meaningful work with a Vision of Hope Media. So like this becomes the engine behind it.
You seem like you're a solution based individual. You see an issue and you want to fix it. So you try to find a solution to the issue. Drugs, recovery, rehab, the auto industry, the dealership industry. You see something that's missing. Is that something that was instilled in you as a young child, or is that something that just developed over the years?
Yeah, I'd say it was in me since a young child. Like another example of that is middle school. I want to say like sixth grade. I used to take my dog for walks all the time, and we'd walk by this park that was near the house, and it was always just strewn with litter. And so instead of kind of complaining about it, I formed a group. We called ourselves Yale, and it stood for Youth Against Littering the Environment. And it would be a bunch of friends, and they'd come over like every other weekend, something like that, and we'd go down to the park and clean it up. And ended up there's like a local pizza shop that would donate pizzas to us on our cleanup days. And I remember we were on like the front page of Easter Sunday newspaper, kind of featuring us. And like that wasn't why I did it. I saw a dirty park and thought it needed to be cleaned, so I decided to organize some people to clean it. And yeah, I'd say I've always kind of been that way.
Yeah, you just touched on something else that was interesting, and that's the youth. Youth today, there's so much out there, social media influence. We talked about the circle of friends. And maybe there's a teen right now, maybe there's a youth who's in that position right now. They're very vulnerable, right? They're very vulnerable with the people they're hanging out with, maybe the situation at home. What message would you want to send to the youth right now, this to a teen right now that's maybe in a similar situation that you were in, and try to direct them from going down that same path?
I'd say that, if you're having like issues with kids at school, just realize that it's only temporary. That your situation will change, and once you're done with school, like it's going to be like your life is just starting. So like, don't make any decisions that you can't come back from. Change is like the only constant, and you can literally make your life whatever you want it to be, but you just have to envision it and then work towards it. So, don't fall into self-limiting beliefs like I can't do this, I can't do that. One quote that I really like is whether you tell yourself you can or you can't, either way, you're right.
What about those who feel like reaching out? Because sometimes, they feel weak because they reach out for help. What would you say to somebody about that's in that situation about reaching out and getting some guidance, getting some counseling, getting some kind of help?
There is no shame in that. None of us are completely independent. I mean, we cannot do surgery on ourselves. We can't do dental work on ourselves. We all depend on other people at different times, and there's no shame in asking for help. I mean, when Caroline passed, I mean, I saw a grief counselor and a regular therapist, and I talked to a lot of people. I stayed on the phone. And, sometimes when we're going through periods of hardship, we have to have people to lean on. And there's nothing wrong with that. And I think if the shoes were on the other foot, if someone came to you with the problem that you're struggling with, how would you feel? Chances are you'd feel almost a little bit like proud that the fact that they're trusting you with that issue. I mean, and most people aren't going to, when someone comes to them vulnerable, they're not going to be like, "Ugh, I don't got time for this." Like it's, even if they don't have time right now, that's probably not the response you're going to get. It's going to be like, okay, I can't do this right now. Are you available at this time? So just don't, if you need help, do not be afraid to ask for it.
Let's talk a little bit more about how people can get in contact with you, find out more information about the book, about the trilogy, let's talk how they can reach you and work with you and work with your program.
Yeah, I mean, I'm on all social media, Andrew Drasen, Drasen. You can go to avisionofhopebook.com that has podcast appearances, the blog, events. You can find the links to the books, all that fun stuff.
Is there anything that you want to leave the audience with that we haven't touched on?
I mean, I guess I kind of want to just really hone in on that self-limiting beliefs. I mean, we talk to ourselves more than we talk to anyone else in our entire life, and what we tell ourselves matters. So, first we got to become aware of what we're telling ourselves, and then kind of challenge it when it's not based on reality or it's self-defeating thinking. I truly, but another thing that kind of blows my mind is like everything that ever is, was, or will be began as a thought. Any invention, any circumstance, like pretty much anything, it all started as a thought. So it's like, what are you going to spend your time thinking about, and what thoughts are you going to hold on to and act on?
That's powerful. Yeah, and I think it comes down to also being able to look at that person in the mirror. Actually look, not just glance it, but actually take a second and look at who's looking back at you, right? I mean, that is, it's hard. It's hard for us to do that. We don't want to see that person because of everything that's gone through. But sometimes we've got to take time to just look at that person in the mirror and talk about what you've gone through. That in itself is kind of a relief in saying, hey, you've gone through this. Look at you. You're still here. You've survived. You can move on. Is that something that you see could be beneficial?
Oh yeah, definitely. And I mean, that's something I'll do every now and again. I'll stand and I'll look at myself in the mirror, and I'll talk to myself. I'll be like, "You good, bro?" And it's like, I got you. Like, don't worry, I got you. Like just building self trust.
Yeah, I think I've even yelled at him once or twice. So, well, listen, Andrew, it's been great having you. Before we wrap things up, as you know, the name of the show is Eagle Freedom Presents. So, everything that you've gone on through your childhood, from being involved in the drugs to your incarceration to where you are now, what does the word freedom mean to you?
Freedom means the ability to choose your path. I mean, I'm just gonna leave it at that.
Wow, that's beautiful because you've definitely been on a path where you've had that opportunity to choose that. Well, Andrew, I want to say again, thank you very much for spending time with us, sharing your journey with our audience. And for those of you out there that are struggling, I highly recommend that you reach out to Andrew. He's got a great program, the 90-day step program. It's a wonderful way to get your life back on track. So, Andrew, again, thank you very much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Dustin.
All right. And for those of you out there, what was it that you got from this interview? What was your key takeaway? Drop it in the comments below. And remember that you too can rise, inspire, and overcome. God bless.